Julia had never been a morning person, but that Tuesday morning something pushed her out of bed earlier than usual. The streets of Chicago were quiet, the city still waking up, and the air had that fresh, crisp feeling she liked. She walked into the small gym near her apartment, the familiar smell of rubber mats and faint perfume of energy drinks greeting her. She preferred the calm hours before the crowd arrived, a private space to focus on herself. Julia hopped onto the treadmill, headphones on, lost in her thoughts about her marriage. Lately, things with Mark had felt distant. He was busy with work, and conversations had become short, polite, almost mechanical. Julia had tried to ignore it, thinking it was temporary, but the emptiness she felt in those quiet moments was growing heavier. She tried to lose herself in the rhythm of her run when a voice, soft yet unmistakable, broke her concentration. "Julia?" She froze, her feet slipping slightly on the treadmill. Turning her head, her heart skipped. Victoria, her mother-in-law, stood there, effortlessly poised even in gym clothes, with a bright smile that made Julia's stomach twist in a strange mix of surprise and curiosity. Victoria had always been elegant, confident, someone who seemed untouchable, and seeing her here, in this ordinary, everyday setting, felt surreal. "I didn't expect to see you here," Victoria said, her tone warm and casual, but there was something in her gaze that made Julia feel exposed, like Victoria could see the worries she had tried so hard to hide. Julia mumbled a greeting, unsure what to say, and Victoria suggested they finish their workouts together and grab a smoothie afterward. Julia hesitated, she wasn't sure if this was casual friendliness or something more, but she agreed, drawn by the ease of Victoria's presence. As they moved through their exercises, Julia noticed small details she hadn't before, the way Victoria encouraged her to push a little further, the way her laughter filled the room, and the subtle, knowing looks she sometimes gave. It made Julia aware of her own emotions in a way that was both thrilling and confusing. By the time they left the gym for their smoothie, the sun had risen higher, casting golden light over the city streets. Julia felt a mix of excitement and unease, wondering why this meeting had affected her so deeply. She tried to push the thought away, telling herself it was just coincidence, yet her mind kept returning to Victoria's smile, her voice, and the strange fluttering in her chest that she didn't understand. Walking together, sharing light conversation about workouts and health, Julia felt a closeness she hadn't expected. Victoria spoke of routines, favorite smoothie recipes, and little stories about Mark's childhood, revealing a side of him Julia had never known. Listening to Victoria, Julia felt as if she was seeing Mark from a new perspective, and it was oddly comforting yet unsettling. She realized that this simple encounter at the gym had shifted something inside her, awareness, curiosity, and a subtle longing that made her question the quiet distance in her marriage. By the time they parted ways that morning, Julia was already anticipating the next encounter, a strange mixture of guilt, excitement, and emotional stirrings she couldn't name. Walking back to her apartment, she replayed every detail of the meeting, from Victoria's laugh to the gentle way she had touched Julia's arm while explaining a story. She wondered if Mark had any idea how close his mother and she could become, how easily an innocent meeting could turn into something that challenged the boundaries of her feelings. That morning at the gym wasn't just another routine, it had opened a door into a world of emotions Julia hadn't explored, a world where admiration, connection, and curiosity mingled in ways that made her heart race and her mind spin. She sat by her window later, sipping her coffee, staring at the city below, and realized she was at the start of a journey that would change everything she thought she knew about herself, her marriage, and the complicated, beautiful nature of human connection. Over the next few weeks, Julia found herself going to the gym more often than before, telling herself it was for her health, but secretly, she was drawn by the thought of seeing Victoria again. Each encounter felt effortless at first, friendly greetings, shared exercises, casual chats about smoothies, workouts, and daily routines, but gradually, their conversations deepened in ways Julia hadn't anticipated. Victoria had a way of listening that made Julia feel truly seen, as if someone understood the quiet anxieties and frustrations she carried. They began talking about personal topics. Julia opened up about the subtle tension in her marriage, the loneliness she sometimes felt, and the fears she hadn't shared with anyone. Victoria responded with gentle advice and stories from her own life, never judgmental, always thoughtful, offering perspectives Julia hadn't considered. One evening, the gym was bathed in the soft glow of sunset streaming through the windows, and Julia found herself sharing memories and emotions she didn't even realize she needed to voice. Victoria laughed warmly at her small anecdotes, and when she spoke of Mark's childhood, Julia felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and curiosity. Seeing her husband through his mother's eyes revealed a side of him she had never truly known. The connection between them began to feel electric, though Julia couldn't put it into words. She noticed the subtle gestures, Victoria's hand brushing lightly against hers during conversation, the way her eyes lingered with attention, and the warm, encouraging tone she used that seemed to touch something deep within Julia. It stirred emotions she wasn't used to acknowledging: admiration, fascination, and an almost magnetic pull that left her both excited and uneasy. Julia began to catch herself thinking about Victoria outside of the gym, replaying their conversations, imagining what it would feel like to be around her even when no one else was there. She felt conflicted, guilty even, because she loved Mark and valued her marriage, yet she couldn't deny the thrill of emotional closeness that Victoria provided. Their friendship grew quickly, but with that growth came tension. Julia started noticing the longing in her own heart, the subtle ache that came when Victoria was absent, and the quiet anticipation she felt whenever she knew they would meet. One night, after a particularly long session, Victoria invited Julia to take a walk around the nearby park, just to talk. The city lights reflected on the river as they walked side by side, and Julia felt a mixture of comfort and nervousness that made her pulse quicken. They spoke about dreams, regrets, and the challenges of relationships, and Julia realized that Victoria's perspective often illuminated truths about herself she had ignored for too long. She felt seen, not just as Mark's wife, but as an individual with her own feelings, desires, and fears. The emotional intimacy was intoxicating, and Julia caught herself laughing more freely, sharing deeper thoughts, and feeling lighter after each encounter. Yet, underneath it all, a quiet tension lingered, a question she couldn't shake about the intensity of her feelings and the boundaries of their connection. The more she spent time with Victoria, the more she began to recognize that the emotional pull wasn't just curiosity or friendship, it was an awakening of something she hadn't understood about herself. She found herself replaying moments in her head, Victoria's warm smiles, the gentle way she encouraged Julia to speak her heart, the depth in her eyes when she listened, and the rare vulnerability she revealed in their private conversations. These thoughts made Julia both excited and uneasy, as she realized that her heart was responding in ways she hadn't anticipated, creating a mix of longing, guilt, and fascination. By the end of each visit, Julia walked away feeling transformed, her mind racing with emotions she couldn't fully name, a strange blend of warmth, desire for closeness, and an aching curiosity about what this connection truly meant. She began questioning herself and her marriage, wondering why she hadn't felt this level of understanding and intimacy before, why someone outside her relationship could stir such powerful emotions. Yet at the same time, she valued the lessons these interactions were teaching her, about honesty, emotional openness, and the parts of herself she had neglected. Each meeting with Victoria became a mirror, reflecting both the gaps in her marriage and the unexplored depths of her own heart, leaving Julia caught between comfort and desire, admiration and longing, excitement and guilt. The gym, which had once been just a place for exercise, had transformed into a space of emotional awakening, where Julia confronted feelings she didn't fully understand, realized the strength of human connection, and discovered that some relationships, though complicated, could leave an indelible mark on the heart. As Julia walked home each evening, the city lights twinkling around her, she felt both restless and exhilarated, knowing that this growing bond with Victoria was changing everything about the way she saw herself, her marriage, and the possibilities of love and understanding in her life. One evening, Julia felt a mixture of excitement and nerves as she agreed to meet Victoria outside the gym for coffee, telling herself it was just friendly conversation, but deep down, she knew it was something more. The cafe was quiet, the warm glow of hanging lights reflecting off the windows, and the soft hum of background music made the space feel intimate. As they sat across from each other, Julia noticed small details she had never paid attention to before, the way Victoria's fingers traced the rim of her cup, the subtle expressions in her eyes, and the gentle inflections in her voice that carried care and understanding. Their conversation flowed effortlessly at first, laughter mingling with thoughtful pauses, but gradually the topics became personal, deeper, and more revealing. Julia found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone else, talking about her insecurities, the gaps she felt in her marriage with Mark, and the silent yearning for emotional closeness she hadn't realized she had been craving. Victoria listened attentively, never interrupting, offering insight through stories from her own experiences, moments of vulnerability, and perspectives that made Julia feel truly understood. There was a magnetic tension between them, subtle but undeniable, in the way their eyes met and lingered, in the light touches of hands when emphasizing a point, and in the warmth that seemed to radiate from Victoria. Julia felt guilt, too, for the thoughts that began to surface: admiration, fascination, and a strange pull towards someone who was, by every measure, her mother-in-law. Yet it wasn't about romantic desire in a conventional sense. It was about connection, emotional intimacy, and the revelation of parts of herself she had neglected. As they walked together after coffee, the city streets alive with evening lights, Julia felt the emotional closeness deepen, each conversation peeling back layers of her heart. Victoria shared stories about Mark she had never told Julia before, revealing his fears, dreams, and tender moments from childhood, and Julia felt a mix of warmth, nostalgia, and a strange longing she couldn't fully explain. The bond between them grew in complexity. Julia was captivated by Victoria's wisdom, her gentle confidence, and the ease with which she could be vulnerable, and she started questioning her own emotions and the lines she thought she had to maintain. That night, Julia lay awake, replaying every detail, the cadence of Victoria's voice, the way her laughter felt like a balm, and the moments when their eyes connected with unspoken understanding. She realized that this connection had awakened feelings of self-awareness, curiosity, and emotional longing that she had suppressed for too long, feelings that weren't about betrayal but about understanding the depth of human connection and the gaps she felt in her own life. The intensity of these encounters left Julia both exhilarated and conflicted. She loved Mark, yet she couldn't deny the impact of Victoria's presence on her heart and mind. The emotional closeness created a swirl of fascination, admiration, and reflection, forcing Julia to confront questions about herself, her marriage, and the nature of love. It wasn't about crossing boundaries in a physical sense, but about the discovery of emotional truths, the awakening of feelings she hadn't recognized, and the realization that some connections could be profoundly transformative even without traditional romance. Victoria's presence highlighted Julia's own longing for validation, attention, and understanding, and in those quiet moments together, Julia felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. She began to understand that love and emotional attachment could take many forms, that intimacy wasn't limited to romance alone, and that human hearts often seek connection where they feel safe, seen, and understood. As the city lights glimmered through her apartment window that night, Julia reflected on the delicate tension of her emotions, the admiration and affection she felt toward Victoria, the love she had for Mark, and the subtle awakening of her own desires for closeness, honesty, and recognition. She realized that life sometimes challenges us with unexpected relationships, and those challenges, though confusing and intense, are opportunities for growth, self-discovery, and deeper understanding of the human heart. That evening, Julia understood that the bond with Victoria had changed her perspective entirely, showing her how longing, admiration, and emotional intimacy could coexist with love and commitment, and that sometimes, the heart finds lessons in the most surprising connections, leaving a lasting mark that reshapes the way we see ourselves and the people around us. Weeks passed, and Julia felt a growing need to understand the complex emotions Victoria had stirred in her, so she invited her mother-in-law over under the pretense of asking for advice about her marriage. Victoria arrived with her usual grace, carrying warmth and a calm presence that immediately put Julia at ease. They settled on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below like a blanket of stars, and began to talk. The conversation started casually but quickly drifted into deeper territory, touching on love, trust, longing, and the challenges people face in understanding their own hearts. Victoria spoke softly, sharing her own reflections on life and relationships, admitting that sometimes the connections we form aren't simple, that emotions can surprise us, and that they often teach lessons about honesty, self-awareness, and courage. Julia listened, feeling a mixture of relief, fascination, and emotional clarity. She realized that her feelings toward Victoria weren't about replacing Mark or acting on impulse, they were about understanding a part of herself she had ignored for years, the need for emotional closeness, validation, and recognition. As they spoke, Victoria reached out and held Julia's hand briefly, a gesture full of warmth and reassurance, and in that moment, Julia felt a profound sense of comfort and understanding, as if all the confusion and longing had found a safe space. They shared stories of heartbreak, joy, and personal growth, each moment reinforcing the bond of trust and emotional intimacy between them. Julia felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from the intensity of feeling understood and seen in ways she hadn't experienced before. She realized that the gym meeting, which had seemed so ordinary at first, had led her to a revelation about herself and her life, a reminder that love, connection, and intimacy can take many forms, and that emotional honesty is often more powerful than physical attraction. Victoria's presence illuminated gaps in Julia's life, particularly in her marriage, where she had grown accustomed to routine and overlooked subtle emotional needs. That evening, Julia allowed herself to fully embrace her vulnerability, speaking openly about her fears, hopes, and the complexity of her heart. Victoria responded with patience, empathy, and insight, never pushing, never judging, but guiding Julia toward self-understanding and acceptance. They shared a quiet, meaningful embrace, one that conveyed trust, care, and mutual respect rather than romantic or physical desire, yet it left Julia feeling deeply moved and transformed. She understood that this connection had opened her eyes to the nuances of love, loyalty, and emotional fulfillment, and that she could now approach her marriage with renewed awareness and honesty. Julia left the balcony that night feeling a sense of peace mixed with reflection, her heart lighter but wiser, aware that some relationships, though unconventional in their impact, teach us invaluable lessons about ourselves. She knew her love for Mark remained strong, but she also recognized that the bond with Victoria had awakened emotional depths and understanding she had never explored before, showing her the importance of vulnerability, compassion, and clear communication in all her relationships. The meeting at the gym, once a simple coincidence, had become a turning point, a journey into self-discovery, emotional truth, and the intricate nature of human connection. Julia realized that life often challenges us in unexpected ways, presenting relationships that test our hearts and force us to confront our own desires and fears. Through this experience, she learned that intimacy isn't limited to romance or physical closeness. It can be found in trust, empathy, and the courage to explore feelings honestly. That night, looking out at the city lights, Julia felt gratitude for Victoria's presence, for the honesty they shared, and for the clarity that came from embracing the complexities of her heart. She understood that her journey of love, self-awareness, and emotional growth had been irrevocably changed by that meeting at the gym, and while the path ahead remained uncertain, she was ready to move forward with deeper insight, compassion, and a renewed sense of connection, with Mark, with herself, and with the unexpected bonds life sometimes brings.